4 Conservative Brexiteers have announced that they will back the Prime Minister's withdrawal deal in Tuesday's Commons vote. Theresa May is to warn of the consequences for people's faith in democracy if Brexit is blocked. A leading Republican senator has urged President Trump to reopen parts of the US government that have been shut down since before Christmas. 2 men have fallen to their deaths in the Mourne Mountains in County Down. In football, Manchester United's revival has continued with victory at Tottenham. Theresa May's EU withdrawal deal, which faces a crucial Commons vote in less than 48 hours, has received the backing of 4 Brexiteer backbenchers. One of them, Sir Edward Lee, once an outspoken critic of the Prime Minister's plan, has told fellow Brexit-supporting MPs that they would be playing with fire if they voted against the agreement on Tuesday in the hope of getting something better. Earlier, the Brexit Secretary Steve Barclay warned of a growing risk that MPs could frustrate Britain's departure from the EU. In a speech to factory workers in Stoke-on-Trent in the morning, the Prime Minister will warn that trust in politicians will suffer catastrophic harm if they fail to implement the result of the 2016 referendum. Here's our political correspondent, Vicky Young.
Theresa May's last-ditch attempt to persuade the Commons to back her deal is a direct message to Brexit-backing MPs. She'll tell them that Parliament is more likely to block Brexit than allow Britain to leave the EU without a deal. She'll urge MPs to consider the consequences of their actions on the faith of British people in democracy. Both sides in the 2016 referendum, she'll say, agreed that what the people decided, the politicians would implement. The Brexit Secretary Steve Barclay deployed a similar argument when he told the BBC's Andrew Marr that an intervention by the Commons Speaker John Bercow last week, giving MPs a greater say in the Brexit process, had increased the chances of the UK staying in the EU.
The uncertainty in terms of what will happen in the House has increased. And so those on the Brexiteer side seeking ideological purity with the deal are risking Brexit.
4 Brexit-supporting Conservative MPs announced this evening that they would now back the Prime Minister's plan. Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown told the Westminster Hour he'd changed his mind, even though he still had reservations about the deal.
The possibility of no Brexit must be seriously considered, and I'm a Brexiteer, and I do want to see us leave on the 29th of March. I'm fearful that a coalition in the House of Commons will somehow find a way of either extending Article 50 or, worse still, preventing us leaving altogether.
It's a crumb of comfort for the Prime Minister, but she needs dozens more to follow suit. The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has repeated his call for a general election, but wouldn't be drawn on precisely when he'd try to topple Mrs May, saying only that it would be soon. Some in his party are campaigning for another referendum, but he's still sounding reluctant.
I would rather get a negotiated deal now if we can to stop the danger of a no-deal exit from the EU on the 29th of March, which would be catastrophic for industry, catastrophic for trade, and the long-term effects of that would be huge.
The Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Vince Cable, thinks MPs will assert themselves if the government loses.
Parliament will take control of this process, will insist that we pursue the option of no Brexit. It can happen in one of 2 ways. It can happen simply by cancelling Article 50, which I think would be resented by lots of people, or it can happen by Parliament saying, actually, we go back to the public to have the final say.
It's hard to find anyone in Westminster who thinks Theresa May will win the vote this week, and MPs are discussing a plan B, but there's no agreement about what that should be.
Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has referred herself to an independent standards panel over her actions during a government inquiry into her predecessor, Alex Salmond. Ms Sturgeon said she'd been in contact with Mr Salmond while senior civil servants investigated allegations of sexual harassment against him. He strongly denies the claims. As Katie Hunter reports, the First Minister maintains she acted appropriately.
The First Minister said it was in the interests of the complainants that she should be examined under the Ministerial Code. Nicola Sturgeon said she'd met former First Minister Alex Salmond on 3 occasions and had spoken to him on the phone twice after sexual harassment allegations were made against him to the Scottish Government. On Tuesday, the Scottish Government's handling of the allegations against Mr Salmond was ruled unlawful by Scotland's highest civil court. Nicola Sturgeon said she had acted appropriately and in good faith throughout, and in compliance with the ministerial code at all times, but understood it was important for Parliament and the wider public to be assured of that. Mr Salmond still faces a police investigation. He denies the allegations.
A senior Republican senator is calling on President Trump to reopen the US government for a limited time to try to end the shutdown, now in its fourth week. Lindsey Graham, a close confidant of the president, said he felt the move could end the impasse with the Democrats. Talks have stalled over the funding for Mr Trump's proposed Mexican border wall. From Washington, David Willis.
With both sides in this dispute probably as far apart as they've ever been, Lindsey Graham is urging the president to approve measures to reopen the government for a few weeks, whilst talks continue in an effort to reach agreement on securing America's southern border. Democrats have refused to enter into further negotiations until the government is reopened, and Senator Graham said if an agreement to fund the president's pet project, a wall along the border, couldn't then be reached, the White House could circumvent Congress by declaring a national emergency. Pressure is building on the president as this dispute drags on. Opinion polls show that more Americans blame him and the Republicans for the shutdown than they do the Democrats. Mr Trump, for his part, has accused the Democrats of being everywhere but Washington and having fun whilst he was at the White House waiting to negotiate.
The US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has called for an end to the row between America's Arab allies in the Gulf. He said the 18-month dispute between Qatar and its neighbours was hampering efforts to counter Iran. Mr Pompeo is now in Saudi Arabia, where he said he'd press for full and complete accountability on the murder of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Our correspondent Barbara Plett-Usher reports from Riyadh.
One of the main themes of Mike Pompeo's trip is to rally support for the administration's central policy of isolating Iran and countering its backing of the likes of Hezbollah and Syria's President Assad. But the Americans have not been able to resolve an ongoing feud between Qatar and its Gulf neighbors. Shortly before this trip, Mr. Pompeo's envoy charged with the task admitted failure and resigned. In Doha, the Secretary of State said there needed to be a united front against Iran.
President Trump and I both believe the ongoing dispute in the region has dragged on too long, and the dispute benefits adversaries and harms our mutual interests.
Mr. Pompeo has also been defending President Trump's decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria. He's called it a tactical change that wouldn't alter America's ability to take necessary military action against Islamist extremists. But there are many here who see it as evidence that the U.S. is retreating from the region. A senior member of the Saudi royal family, Prince Turki al-Faisal, told the BBC it was a very negative development.
The US's actions, from my perspective, is that it is going to further complicate the issue rather than find any solutions to it. And it will further entrench not only the Iranians, but also the Russians and Bashar al-Assad. So from that perspective, of course, it is a very negative development.
America's relations with Saudi Arabia are also complicated at the moment because of the murder of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The U.S. Senate has blamed the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman for the killing. The President and Secretary of State have not, but Mr. Pompeo said he would press the Crown Prince to ensure those responsible were held fully accountable.
2 men have died in separate falls while walking in the Mourne Mountains in County Down. Other walkers in the area are being warned to be careful because of high winds. From Belfast, John Campbell reports.
The Mournes form Northern Ireland's largest mountain range, attracting walkers and climbers in all weathers. The first victim fell while walking on Wee Binion Mountain shortly before midday. The second man fell about an hour later on Slieve Commodore. Emergency services were called to both incidents, but both men died at the scene. In the third incident, a man was rescued after he fell and suffered a broken ankle. After the incident, police urged members of the public to exercise extreme caution because of strong winds in the mountains.
At least 5 people have died as a result of unusually heavy snowfalls in the Alps this weekend. 2 workers at a ski resort near Chamonix in France died when explosives they were trying to use to trigger a controlled avalanche went off. In Austria, an avalanche killed 3 German skiers. A 4th person is missing. More heavy snow is forecast in the coming days. Trade unions in Zimbabwe have called for a nationwide strike in response to the government's decision to more than double the price of fuel. Officials say the increase should help to combat severe shortages, but the opposition said the country was descending into a humanitarian crisis. Grant Ferret reports.
There's been a furious reaction to the fuel price rise, which was announced on state TV by President Emmerson Mnangagwa. The cost of a litre of fuel went up overnight from about $1.30 a litre to over $3. Trade unions have described the price rise as provocative and insensitive. Zimbabwe is struggling to cope with severe fuel shortages which have led to long queues at petrol stations. The shortages were prompted by a lack of foreign currency.
The family of an 11-year-old boy who died in a hit-and-run incident in Manchester say he was an intelligent, caring boy who loved his mates and Manchester United. Taylor Schofield died of his injuries following the crash in the Beswick area of the city on Saturday. Police are questioning a 31-year-old man on suspicion of causing death by dangerous driving. Local people say the road where Taylor was hit is very dangerous.
The near misses we've had, kids are always playing here, they're always on bikes. It's the young lads around here, they're stupid. They just speed up here 70, 90 miles an hour. I'm surprised somebody else has not died with it. It's been going on for years and nothing's been done.
In football, Manchester United have won their sixth game in a row under their interim manager Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, and Saracens have qualified for the last 8 of Rugby Union's European Champions Cup. Rounding up the sport is Nicola McCarthy.
Ole Gunnar Solskjaer says David De Gea is making a case to be considered Manchester United's greatest ever goalkeeper after he produced a masterclass to protect his side's 1-0 lead against Tottenham. Marcus Rashford scored the only goal of the game in the 44th minute at Wembley, with De Gea making 11 saves for United, and Solskjaer was full of praise for his number one.
Well, I think he's the best in the world. Obviously there's a few other decent ones out there, but I'm very, very happy he's in my team.
There was more bad news for Tottenham as striker Harry Kane limped off the pitch, having injured his ankle. Boss Mauricio Pochettino says he will be assessed in the coming days. In today's other game, Everton won the mid-table battle with a 2-0 victory over Bournemouth at Goodison Park. In rugby, Exeter boss Rob Baxter says he's ready for a fantastic test when his side face a Champions Cup showdown against Munster next week. Baxter's men kept their quarter-final hopes alive with a 34-12 bonus point victory over Castra, but must beat Munster in order to progress.
It's a big challenge for us, but it's one now we should be really relishing. Effectively we're in the last 16 of Europe. That's something pretty special, and we should look at it like a huge knockout game.
Saracens booked their place in the last 8 with a bonus point 28-10 victory over Lyon, while Glasgow, who are second in that group, also edged closer to a quarter-final spot with a bonus point 33-24 win over Cardiff. As the Netball World Cup looms, England kicked off their international quad series campaign with a 54-41 win over New Zealand in Liverpool. Earlier in the day, Australia beat South Africa 54-41. And finally, in the first round of the Masters snooker, Ryan Day beat John Higgins 6-5 with a break of 128 to wrap it up. Earlier, the defending champion Mark Allen lost to Luca Brecel.
Time now for our first look at the morning papers, and under the headline 24 hours to save Brexit, the Daily Express focuses on the speech by Theresa May in the morning when she'll make a last-ditch appeal to Tory rebels to get behind her plan. The Financial Times says a handful of MPs have swung behind the Prime Minister's deal, but she could still be on track to lose Tuesday's crunch vote by a margin of nearly 200. The Guardian reports that the EU could offer Mrs May a delay to Brexit, at least until July, if her deal is defeated in the Commons. The Telegraph says the most polluting wood-burning stoves will be banned under the government's new air pollution strategy. According to the Times, the strategy contains measures that could eventually cut the health costs of air pollution by £1.7 billion a year. Finally, The Guardian highlights a call for school leavers to apply to universities only after receiving their A-level results. The Universities and College Union says this would eliminate controversial unconditional offers and remove the bias in favour of applicants from private schools. The headlines again. 4 Conservative Brexiteers have announced they'll back the Prime Minister's withdrawal deal in Tuesday's Commons vote. Theresa May is to warn of the consequences for people's faith in democracy if Brexit is blocked. A leading Republican senator has urged President Trump to reopen parts of the US government that have been shut down since before Christmas. 2 men have fallen to their deaths in the Mourne Mountains in County Down. BBC News.